All right, for more on the ANC NEC meeting, let's cross over now to our reporter Aldrin Sampier, who is in Irene in Pretoria. A very good afternoon to you, Aldrin. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Zuma is facing a second motion of no confidence in 6 months. So what can we expect to be further said about this?
Well, basically what's currently happening is that the NEC meeting is currently underway and expected to end today. It's been a 3-day-long meeting. And of course, the major issue coming out of this NEC meeting will be whether the motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma, which was pushed by Joel Netshitenzhe, which has been widely reported, and according to our sources as well, who have confirmed that he was the person who put up his hand and wanted the NEC to discuss the president, to discuss the state of the ANC and the alliance under the leadership of President Jacob Zuma. Various issues during those discussions were raised, including the fact that the ANC lost some votes, support during during the local government elections, and of course there's the issue around Nkandla as well. But as you said, Simpiwe, that even about 6 months ago, when there was that possibility of a push that came from Derek Hanekom, that failed. But even outside of the ANC, attempts by the opposition, for instance, in Parliament, to have a motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma, those two attempts last year after the Nkandla court case ruling have failed. But I guess what makes it more different this time around is that you have the alliance partners like COSATU, like the SACP, who are calling on President Jacob Zuma to step down. But when you look into COSATU's resolution, for instance, saying that President Jacob Zuma will not be allowed to speak at any events of COSATU, that really sends the message home that they are quite clear that they have no confidence whatsoever in President Jacob Zuma. And those are some of the issues, I guess, that those who are against President Jacob Zuma will be pushing to the fore. But of course, on the other hand as well, you have supporters of President Jacob Zuma who believe that President Jacob Zuma has been a great leader for the party. They believe that the president has been able to unify the party since the 2007 debacle, the race heading into Polokwane, the race between himself as well as Thabo Mbeki. They believe that this time around, with the leadership of President Jacob Zuma, he's been able to unify the party. I guess the conundrum for the ANC as it stands at the moment is President Jacob Zuma finishing his term as president of the ANC. I see that there are some reports, newspaper reports, that there were some of the arguments that were advanced as well, that considering there's only 6 months up until the elective conference of the ANC in December, President Jacob Zuma, as president of the ANC, should be allowed to finish that term. The other conundrum then, of course, is that after the elective conference in December, what happens? Because then President Jacob Zuma remains the president of the country. Should he then step down as the president of the country? It would be quite interesting to see what's the final decision that this NEC will be coming down to.
Now, the revelations in the City Press and the Sunday Times about President Zuma's alleged Dubai exit plan now have made the ground more fertile for the NEC to intensify its calls for Zuma to step down. Any word in that regard?
Well, we haven't been speaking to any NEC members at this point, but chances are that if you have such an explosive report, both in the Sunday Times as well as the City Press, both leading with those leaked emails, that this is something that could be used against President Jacob Zuma, and of course advancing the cause of those who are calling for the president to step down. But I see in the Sunday Times, he's responded to the article where he said that he has no plans whatsoever of leaving the country. He will remain in the country. But even if you listen back to the birthday speech that he gave on April the 12th, when he was in Soweto, when there was the birthday celebration of President Jacob Zuma, he spoke about what he calls that if the NEC of the ANC decides right now, this was now back in April on the 12th, decides that Jacob Zuma, you must step down as the president tomorrow, quote unquote, he said that he will do that and will return to the branches of the ANC and remain an active member of the ANC and participate, as he calls it, and use his skills, his debating skills, in advancing the cause of the ANC. So this probably pours cold water on the speculation that the president might skip the country. But some people that I've spoken to, for instance, have spoken about how there is this plan for the president to exit the country, and of course using the links through the Gupta family.
And we do understand that the number of NEC members who are now calling for President Zuma's head on a plate has now actually increased to more than half. Any truth to those claims? What have you heard?
Well, those are based on analysis. I know that the Mail and Guardian on Friday, for instance, they ran a piece where they spoke about how the NEC is split. The Sunday Times this morning has a graph where they show how exactly the NEC of the ANC split in terms of those who are for President Jacob Zuma and those who are against Jacob Zuma. And quite interesting, what the Sunday Times has done is that at the bottom of that they have those that they're calling that these are people that are undecided at this point in time whether they support President Jacob Zuma or they not support President Jacob Zuma. But you know, Simpio, the interesting thing about the call on President Jacob Zuma to resign is that there is this debate right now. Of course, we're waiting for the Constitutional Court to set down a ruling on whether the vote of no confidence in President Jacob Zuma, when that motion is being debated in Parliament eventually, whether the vote should be done in secret. Quite interesting, though, so what we need to understand is that according to Section 102 of the Constitution, and I guess this is some of the arguments that would come through from the NEC members as well, in terms of Section 102 of the Constitution and a motion of no confidence against the President, if that motion is passed, successfully so by the opposition parties and as well as those people who are in Parliament against President Jacob Zuma, that would mean that the entire executive, all 70 members of cabinet as well as the executive, will need to step down. And people could be arguing here in the NEC that instead of having that motion of no confidence against the President being done at a level in Parliament, let's rather have it debated here at the NEC and take a decision on whether the President should resign rather than having a vote of no confidence against him in Parliament, because that will be quite disruptive, not only for the country but also for the ANC's own unity, considering that there will be plus minus 70 people who would lose their titles as ministers as well as deputy ministers.
And having said that, for argument's sake, should the vote of no confidence be debated there at the NEC meeting, then is there perhaps an expectation that the opposition will actually agree to abort the vote of no confidence in Parliament?
Well, I guess then the matter would become moot if President Jacob Zuma decides after this NEC meeting that he would resign. Then there would be no basis to have a motion of no confidence against the president. Then there's arguably no debate to be had, because then the president would have decided that he's stepping down as the president of the country, and I'm not sure whether he'll be stepping down as the president of the ANC. As I said earlier on, that those who are supporting the president have also made the argument that President Jacob Zuma should continue his term and finish his term in December, when the elective conference of the ANC will be held here in Gauteng.
Now, Alden, just before I let you go, yesterday the Secretary-General, Gwede Mantashe, repeatedly and sternly insisted that no motion of confidence on President Jacob Zuma will be tabled at the NEC meeting. But then it is since emerged that Joel Netshichende has actually tabled that motion of no confidence. Could it have been a surprising twist of events, or could it have been a classic case of what is now known as Mantashing on the part of Gwede Mantashe?
Well, I guess we'd have to ask him, and the chances are that he will say that I was not touching on that. But of course, yes, he did make that statement, and he said that it wasn't on the agenda of the ANC. However, though, as far back as November last year, during the last ANC's NEC, last year rather, in November, the last ANC NEC meeting, Derek Hanekom raised the issue, and that was also not on the agenda. So it does not mean when a matter is not on the agenda in terms of scheduling for a meeting that it cannot be raised from the floor. And that's the reason why the likes of Joel Netshichende have used that right to stand up and say that let's debate the motion of no confidence against the president. Let's debate President Jacob Zuma's leadership and whether he should step down. I see there was a report as well that indicates that there are some who are calling for a panel to be set up, a panel that would look into the calls for the president to step down, as well as the calls on those who are saying that the president should finish his term as the president of the country. country as well as the president of the ANC. But Simpiwe, I think, you know, as much as there's a lot of focus on President Jacob Zuma's faith in terms of being the president of the country and the president of the ANC, what it has done, it has deflected attention from the succession race, which is quite important as we're having this debate as well. Because one needs to look into who becomes the next president of the ANC, and that person, what powers that person has, and what exactly that person would like to push. And it takes me back to an interview that I had with Matthew Sposa, the former Treasurer General of the ANC, who has made it clear that he'll be standing to become president of the ANC. He's accepted the endorsement that came from a branch in the Western Cape that said that he must become the president of the ANC. And a question that I asked him while we had an interview was that it might probably be the most difficult task for him, should he be elected president of the ANC, is whether he would call and rally on the ANC NEC members who will be elected in Gauteng in December, whether he would be calling on them to make a decisive decision and recall President Jacob Zuma. That will be quite a tough one. And he made it clear, and he said, listen, immediately when that happens, immediately when he's elected president of the ANC, one thing that he will do is to make sure that President Jacob Zuma is removed as the president of the country. And I guess whoever is elected as president of the ANC this December will be facing a similar task. We'll be looking at a similar debate as well, whether or not President Jacob Zuma should be stepping down as the president of the country.
All right, Aldrin, I'm going to let you go for now so you could have your ears on the ground for us, and I'm going to chat to you a little later on this afternoon. But then thank you so much for update. That was a reporter, Aldrin Sampier, just outside the St. George's Hotel in Irene, just outside Pretoria, wherein the ANC NEC meeting is currently underway, and we'll certainly chat to him a little later on this afternoon.